Makes a huge difference if you'll do me a favor by subscribing and liking the podcast wherever you listen. It goes a long way. Thanks, and I hope you enjoy. Alex Hutchinson is a science journalist, author, and speaker. He's based in Toronto with a big picture focus on human performance and particular interests in fitness, endurance sports, and the outdoors. He's written for Outside Magazine's Sweat Science column since 2017, and before that, he wrote a similar column for Runner's World. He also writes regular columns for the Globe and Mail and Canadian Running. Over the years, he's contributed to a wide variety of publications, including the New York Times, the New Yorker, and Popular Mechanics. His latest book, published in March of 2025, is an exploration of the science of exploring. It's called The Explorer's Gene: Why We Seek Big Challenges, New Flavors, and the Blank Spots on the Map. Before that, he wrote the New York Times bestseller Endure: Mind, Body, and the Curiously Elastic Limits of Human Performance, and two other books about, respectively, the science of fitness and the greatest inventions in the modern world. I absolutely loved Endure. I told so many people about it. His previous New York Times bestseller book. I devoured that book in a couple days, and maybe like 2 days, 3 days. And he actually started out as a physicist with a PhD from the University of Cambridge, then a few years as postdoctoral researcher with the U.S. National Security Agency working on quantum computing and nanomechanics. During that time, he competed as a middle and long distance runner for the Canadian national team, mostly as a miler, but also dabbling in cross country and even a bit of mountain running, and maintained a side hustle as an amateur jazz saxophonist. We talk about this human innate desire to explore, and the difference between exploiting and some other aspects that come up in his book, his kids, curiosity, human nature, and we have a pretty wide-ranging conversation, and I just highly recommend check out his books. You can follow him on Substack as well. His newsletter, you can visit alexhutchinson.net and follow him. His writing's incredible. I just really enjoy his perspective on life and human performance, endurance, these topics, that he explores, and why we're seeking challenges and exploring thousands and thousands of years later. Because in his book, he goes back in time to present day. Yeah, I hope you enjoy this conversation. All right, Alex, welcome to the Wisdom of Life.
Thank you very much, Chad. I could use some wisdom of life, so this is perfect.
Me too. I think we all can use some wisdom. I love in your acknowledgement, I wanted to ask you to start off. You said that your daughters sparked the questions in these pages for your book, The Explorer's Gene. How did they spark the questions for you?
Yeah. So okay. My kids are 9 and 11, which means that when I was really getting started on this book, they were maybe 5 and 7 or something like that. I'd been contemplating the idea of a book about exploring and why we're drawn to explore for quite a while. But I think it really crystallized as my kids got to that age, the sort of 4 and 6 age, when they're little people and they're very, very curious. And when they're 2, it's cute and they're curious about how a pots and pans work or whatever. But by that age, we were starting to, and this was actually the pandemic was just happening. We were spending a lot of time together, and we were spending a lot of that time together outdoors in nature, not at the North Pole or anything like that, but down by there's a river that runs about a block from my house, the Humber River, which is surrounded by parklands. It's urban forest, but it's forest. When you get in there, it feels pretty wild. And my memories are just of a year or two there where we were going on expeditions together, like every day, going on a bike trip to see where that path led, or going into the forest and trying to follow the trails or get off the trails, figure out which plants we could eat and which ones we couldn't, building forts. Look, the pandemic was not idyllic, but that aspect of just being down and exploring, it really got me thinking about what it is I love about exploring. And interestingly, like sorry, I'm rambling here in this answer, but
Great. Ramble away.
when exploring comes with the word exploring comes with a lot of kind of baggage of what we think of as exploring, that it's crossing the Atlantic. And I like doing pretty audacious vacations where we're, backpacking or canoeing in very remote areas. And being with my kids, playing with my kids, exploring with my kids was a reminder that what's really satisfying about these explorations isn't necessarily that it has to be epic or distant or discovering something new, but that it's about following curiosity, and that you can scratch that itch, that desire to be exploring in a much more sort of everyday way. And kids are good at that. Kids are very good at that in general, not just my kids, but having that experience of having my kids being that age, I think really got me launched on, no, I really want to understand what is it that we're pursuing here, and what do we get out of it, and why do we do this?
Yeah. And I wonder, did it reignite for you um, that curiosity and that exploration that you maybe had, gone away from a little bit as an adult? Or because you talk about like the kids at that age are just so curious. Like, I mean, I feel like they ask so many questions. Why at that age? And then, the studies show like as we start to age and get to high school and beyond, it's like we're asking why like 5 times a week versus 500 times a day. So I'm curious, did it reignite that flame for you, that spark of curiosity?
Yeah, I mean, it did, and I think maybe the most sort of tangible way is in, there was never a time when I didn't love exploring, but I'd sort of got calcified into this idea that twice a year I would go on big trips where I would indulge my love of exploring. And what the kids helped drag me back towards was the idea that no, exploring doesn't have to be a once or a twice a year indulgence. It can be a part of everyday life. It can be a part of how you find your way through your neighborhood, and what foods you choose to eat, and like all the different ways that are, somewhat cliched, of course, but it's like, you go to a restaurant and it's like, do you order the same thing every time, or do you try something new? And it's like, when you're living with a 5-year-old, everything is new. And like you said, they want to know about everything. And it's interesting, like writing a book about exploring and and about how great curiosity is. And then you've got a 5-year-old asking you, why? And you realize like, oh God, I'm the one who's shutting down this by saying, ask me later. Like, don't bother me anymore. God, like, it's like, no. I need to nurture this curiosity instead of telling them to go away and ask their mother. But yeah, to answer your question, they helped me rediscover it and see that it's all around us, not just like, special occasions and holidays is when we explore or when we get curious.
Yeah. And how can that be valuable for the everyday adult, everyday person to recognize? You talk about those everyday things. It doesn't have to be a trip to Antarctica or, some backpacking expedition or something crossing the Atlantic.
Yeah. I mean, I think so I've contemplated the question like, oh, so why should we explore? I've kind of, thought about it a lot. And there's really two different ways you can answer that question, I think. One is the sort of utilitarian way of like, if you explore, if you indulge your curiosity, if you find ways of pursuing the unknown, it will lead to good things. You will be more creative. You will innovate. You will, make progress in your career. You will discover new foods that you like that you would otherwise have never discovered, whatever. The other is to say it's satisfying. It feels good. It brings a sense of meaning to your life to be pursuing the unknown and growing and finding out new things. So you can pick which one of those arguments clicks for you. Like if you go back far enough in sort of evolutionary history or whatever, they were linked. The reason exploring feels good and meaningful and satisfying to us is that we evolved to the our ancestors who did want to know what was over the next horizon, or what that particular plant tasted like, within limits, obviously. They were successful at finding new types of food, finding new places to live, finding better ways of doing things. And so exploring led to good things, and that's why it feels good. These days, in the modern world, those two things aren't necessarily linked. We're not sort of living in evolutionary time in that sense. We can choose, like, I want to do this because it's fun and it's good and feels meaningful. It makes my life feel great. Or it's like, I want to do this because it's going to, help me achieve my goals career-wise or whatever. But both are true. And I think both, there are times when I lean into one or the other of those things that it's like, I just want to have a good time. I want to feel like there's such a great feeling to discovering new things and to feeling like I'm, growing as a person. But it's like, yeah, as a journalist, I want to be learning new things, going new places. That's going to help me write better stuff and hopefully, produce, better journalistic work.
Yeah. Do you notice, or have you noticed with that experience, those experiences, a difference between, say, doing it yourself and doing it with others, like in your family or in a community, or that relationship with self and relationship with others in that experience?
That's a really good question. So let me answer a slightly different question. Which, I think there's value in being able to tune into your own curiosity, your own interests, in figuring out what you find interesting and meaningful and being able to follow that path. So instead of comparing that to doing it with other people, let me say you could make a comparison between like, what's the difference between finding your way to the top of Everest, being guided by someone else and shepherded and ushered to the top of Everest on a commercial expedition, or like lying on the sofa and watching a documentary about climbing Everest, a really good National Geographic documentary. And if one were to argue that the point of exploring is to learn new things, to learn about the world, it's actually like the National Geographic documentary is probably going to teach you more about what's going on with Everest and how, the history and the geography and the geology and the everything and the culture. You're going to learn more from the documentary, but there's at the other end of the extreme, the feeling of exploring, of discovering is different when you're actively making your own decisions and accepting risk and having consequences and doing what you want to do. So anyway, there's a difference between active and passive exploring. And I think it's important. And I think it's super important in today's society where, algorithms are telling us what music we should listen to next, what books we should read next, 8-second videos we should watch next, or whatever, where we have this sensation of novelty, the feeling that we're exploring new things, like what's next on the TikTok on my TikTok screen, but we're not actually following our own curiosity. We're not actively discovering the world in a way that I think is probably most fruitful for us. So anyway, all of that is to say, I think I haven't answered your question yet, which is alone versus other people. But what I wanted to say is I think it's important sometimes to do what you want to do and not just to be tagging along with the group. But I think in a good group, there's scope for everyone in the group to be expressing their opinions, their desires about what the group should do. And then I think of it in terms of like, let's say my own experience is running. Running is a solitary sport, but I run because of the friendships and bonds I make. And so for me, running is very much about the group and the community. So I think exploring as a group is super valuable as long as you don't become the baggage in the group that's just kind of tagging along and never doing what you want to do.
Yeah. You have to have some sort of agency.
Exactly. You have to have some autonomy, some agency, some decision making. Because one of the ways I think about this is the reason we like exploring, we're fundamentally wired to pursue uncertainty, to open doors that we haven't opened before. But it doesn't mean we want complete uncertainty. There's a sweet spot. We don't want complete randomness, complete chaos, but we don't want complete predictability. And you can they've done experiments with like 8-month-old infants. And this already shows up. If you show an 8-month-old infant a sequence of shapes that is totally random, then they lose interest pretty quickly because there's nothing, they can't predict anything about it. So you can track their attention by when they look away with gaze tracking. If you show them a sequence of shapes that's totally like just the same shape over and over again, they also find that boring because it's totally predictable. And there's a sweet spot in the middle where it's like, if there's a pattern, but it's not immediately obvious, that'll keep their attention because like, oh wait, I think I see what's happening here. And this is at 8 months old. So, they're not even talking at this point. Kids are good at figuring out where that intermediate level of uncertainty, where they have the greatest potential to learn about the world is. So you take your kid to the park and they are like, I wonder what it's like to go down that slide. And so they'll run and they'll go down the slide. After a few times, they've learned what it's like to go down that slide. So now they're trying to go up the slide. And you're like, dude, you can't go up the slide. Like there's someone else coming down. Get off the slide. But they're like, I already know what it's like to go down the slide. I'm not interested in that anymore. Like for better or worse, they're highly attuned to where is there the potential to learn about the world. And I think as we get older, other constraints start to dominate, and we start, we're more concerned about like, what does our boss want us to do? What's the best way to make money? What do I have to do? As opposed to what am I interested in? Where could I learn about the world? So I think the importance of having agency is that if you don't have agency, you're not taking advantage of what your brain knows. Your individual brain has a sense of where the sweet spot of uncertainty is. And if you're following someone else's path, then it's maybe not the path that's teaching you about the world in the best way.
Yeah. Yeah. And two ideas I wanted to touch on there or ask about is one, you talked about passive versus active, right? And another idea was that risk and reward. So if we could touch on passive versus active first. Like, my question, I think, is when we're falling into too much passivity, what are the consequences, and or if you want to answer it differently, like how do we get back to being more active? Like, how do we make that recognition, and what are the benefits of approaching things more in an active way from a exploring standpoint, curiosity and the like?
Yeah. I mean, so when we talk about passive and active, for a lot of people, what will jump to mind is lying on the sofa versus going out and playing a game. And so there's the physical dimension of passive versus active. And I think that's actually a really good analogy for what we're more talking about here, which is the sort of cognitive form of passive versus active. Like, are you making decisions? Are you the one who's weighing the pros and cons of, do we turn right or do we turn left up here? Or are you just sort of following along behind Papa Smurf?
Yeah.
And I think the analogy is actually the physical versus cognitive is actually quite useful, because we've spent centuries developing labor-saving devices that allow us to be less physically active. And the sort of epiphany of the last 50 years is, wait, if we achieve this nirvana where we never have to do any physical work, that does not make us happier. It makes us miserable and unhealthy, and that we have to stay physically active. And so now we pay money to go to special buildings where we can, put our body through physical activity to get back the activity that we've saved ourselves with all these labor-saving devices. And I think we're, on the cusp of a similar recognition for cognitive passivity versus activity that, and I think AI is really bringing that into focus, and there's a few studies starting to emerge where it's like, wait, if you ask people to write an essay with AI, of course, that's garbage. If you ask, to use AI to write the essay, if you ask them to use AI to help them write the essay, they can write a pretty good essay. But compared to if you just ask them to write the essay on themselves, you go back a month later and you sort of ask them about, hey, remember that essay you wrote? Tell me about what you learned from it. The people who used AI, who basically outsourced a bunch of the research and the thinking and the synthesis, they can't remember. They didn't actually learn. They produced a product, but they didn't. In doing so, they didn't add anything to their brains, and so they did not learn in the same way. And I think, like, it's understandable that we want to offload some of the cognitive load of writing an email or whatever like that, but beware, in the same way that, if you offload the physical load of, walking around the block, that's not necessarily the path to long-term happiness. And there's maybe a good sort of advanced test case of this, which is navigation. We in the last 15 years, we've all acquired these devices that not just tell us where to go. You don't even have to have a broad sense of where you're headed. You just have to turn right and turn left when your phone tells you to. And without being too, scaremongery, there are studies that show that this changes your brain. The sizes, the way you navigate is linked to the size of your hippocampus, which is what you need if you want to actually know where you're going, to form a cognitive map, and which is also the seat of memory, and the size of the hippocampus is linked to risk of conditions like Alzheimer's and dementia and PTSD and things like that. And the less you use the hippocampus, the smaller it gets. This is been shown in a lot of studies over the last couple of decades. What are the risks of passivity? It's like, again, you could say, well, it's a less satisfying way to live if you're just kind of along for the ride. But you could also say, actually, it might have some effects on your brain. And I don't want to overstate those effects. I don't want to be like, this is just, it's early going and speculative at this point. But I will say, having read the research, since I wrote this book, I've turned off the turn-by-turn directions in my car. and I still use GPS navigation, and I'll turn on the turn-by-turn directions if I need it, but I try to figure out where I'm going. I try to understand where I'm going, and then I try to look around and figure out where I'm supposed to turn, as opposed to just waiting until the voice says turn left.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, when you think about it makes sense to me from a mental standpoint, a brain standpoint, because if you think about the body, if I just sit for years and I don't exercise in any capacity, then my physical structure will atrophy. So why wouldn't my brain do the same when, and I think about just something basic like when I was a kid, when we were kids, I used to remember my friends' phone numbers.
I could tell you my friends' phone numbers now.
Yeah,
Like
right.
my from childhood. Not now. I don't know my
Yes.
current friend's phone number, but yeah,
Yes. Exactly. Exactly. Same. Yeah. 883-0265 is like my best friends, you know?
absolutely.
And yeah. And now I'm like, wait, what's my mom's phone number? Or,
Yeah, yeah.
because and that's like a simple example of where you're saying like you're offloading it, and so it's easy to, I think, not realize that a consequence is coming down the road if you don't experience that consequence today or tomorrow.
Yeah. And I think maybe one point that's worth making is that technology gives us tools. The tools aren't always inherently bad or good, but we have to be thoughtful about the way we use them. So you could say, hey, we invented a bicycle. And how are we going to use that bicycle? Maybe instead of walking 10 miles, or walking for an hour, we're going to bike for 10 minutes. And now we're going to be doing much less physical activity. Or maybe we're going to say, man, this bike's great. Now I can go 50 miles and visit my friend in the next town. And so we're going to use the technology. We're not going to stop using our bodies, but we're going to use it in a way that it's going to open up new horizons to us. The bicycle's great. And so with GPS, you could, and I've had a lot of conversations with people about GPS navigation, and some people will say, actually, GPS has opened up worlds to me. I go to a new city. I used to be scared to go anywhere because I would get lost if I got 2 blocks from my hotel. Now I'll just go wherever I want to go, and I know that I can. The GPS can always help me find my way back. And so it's giving people the ability and the confidence to explore more. And I think that's true for some people, but the opposite is true for other people, where they're like, yeah, I've lived in this city for a year now, and I still actually don't know where where the library is relative to the grocery store, because I just get in the car, press take me to the library, and follow it. So it's not necessarily about rejecting technology. It's about being thoughtful in how we use it so that it's allowing us to do more rather than avoid doing anything.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I like that word, being thoughtful makes me think of being mindful about, okay, like there are new opportunities here by using this in a way that can open up new possibilities for me versus restrict, constrain the way I experience the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's just a question of I don't want to make it sound simple, but yeah, like you said, it's a question of not just defaulting to whatever's easiest, but to thinking about how this is changing how you think, how it's changing what you do, and whether this is how you want your life to change.
Yeah, yeah. On the topic of risk and reward, right? Because that was the other piece I wanted to ask you about. Like when we think about that, like the explorers you talk about in the book, for example. I mean, going across oceans and these big explorations. How do we distinguish between the like courage and recklessness, right? Or that risk and reward in our own pursuits of growth, exploration, uncertainty. How do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think it's worth doing some defining, or talking about what we mean by these words, because again, like risk is kind of a loaded word, and so when we think about risk in the context of exploring, we're thinking about people freezing to death in the Arctic or sailing off the edge of the Earth, as they head out into the ocean or whatever. But also, risk just means like you put a coin in a slot machine, and you have a risk of losing the coin. Like there's a risk of failure. Exploring inherently carries with it a risk of failure. If there was no risk of failure, it wouldn't be exploring. It would be a sure thing. So you're going into the unknown, and it might turn out that this choice is going to be worse than the alternative. So you go to a restaurant, framing it in terms of the explore exploit dilemma, which is the terminology that's often used. Is it, do you explore something new? You exploit what you are familiar with. So you go to a restaurant, do you order the dish you know is pretty good, or do you try the special? And the reward, the potential reward of trying the special is that it might be awesome. But the truth is, it might be worse than the burger you've had the last 7 times. And if you order the special, then you feel like an idiot because you're like, man, I can't believe I bought this, crap when I could have just had the burger, which I know is good. So there is risk, but that's different from like physical risk or even like existential risk. So like think of it, I do a whitewater canoeing trip every summer, and we pick a river, we go and we paddle down the river, and we have to make decisions about, is this a rapid that we can paddle through, or should we portage around this rapid? And without, pumping myself up too much, I would say I'm the most experienced whitewater canoeist on the trip, but that does not mean that I paddle the most rapids, because I am I like to think I'm adventurous. I like to think I love exploring. But I'm very risk averse when it comes to my physical safety. So I see a river or a rapid, and I'm like, maybe not. You know what? I'm just going to portage this. And I have friends who, might objectively have, I would say, a lower chance of paddling that rapid successfully. But they're like, if we tip over, we get wet. What's the big deal? And the chance of drowning is quite small. And so they'll take that risk. So all of which is to say, pursuing exploring or trying to make exploring part of the pursuit of growth in your life does not mean being foolhardy or accepting risks. And so the analogy in the sort of everyday life is like, you're contemplating a career switch or whatever. It's like, if you've got a family of 8 to feed and, you're living paycheck to paycheck, then your freedom or your willingness to pursue a different opportunity when someone says, hey, I've got a chance to come and work at this startup. There's a 1 in 10 chance it'll work, but if it does, it'll be great. You have to think about like, what's the downside if it doesn't work? Like your 8 children are starving in the street. It's not about like, don't you like exploring? No, it's about being realistic about what the risks are. And it's a lot easier to explore, to take risks or it's a lot more logical or palatable when the downside is we failed, but not, we died, or whatever the case may be, or the equivalent of like, we went bankrupt versus we don't have as much money as we would have if we hadn't done this.
Yeah. So it sounds like it can be context dependent as, and then also individual characteristics based upon, like you were talking about the whitewater rafting, where okay, you have the most experience and expertise, but you're going, okay, no, I don't need to attempt that, where someone else is going, okay, yeah, I'm right, it'll all work out.
Yeah, so like there's definitely people who have a bigger appetite for uncertainty, but there's also people who have a bigger appetite for risk, and those are slightly different like concepts. And there's various technical definitions of what we mean by uncertainty and risk and ambiguity, but without getting into any of that, it's just like, when one person chooses to take a chance and another person doesn't, it doesn't necessarily mean that person is more exploratory. It might mean that their context is different and that their analysis of what the consequences would be if things go badly is different. And so, yeah, it's really, you have to be wary about comparing yourselves to other people because their context might be different of yours.
For sure, right? The saying, comparison is the thief of all joy. It's like we don't
Yeah.
know, yeah, we don't know what their narrative, right, and what their environment and situation is. We're just seeing it from our lens, putting ourselves going, okay, well, Alex is doing X or would do this, but I don't know how you're raised and what you're dealing with and all that.
Yeah, I mean, and one of the classic examples is like, who's willing to who's willing to go take a chance, take an unpaid internship to get a foot in the door of this career, and it's like, that's very courageous, and that's why they got ahead in this industry. And it's like, yeah, if they come from a comfortable, well-off family where the consequences of failure are low, that's very different than someone who doesn't have that safety net. And so that's the classic sort of socioeconomic. We celebrate people who are willing to take risks, but we also have to understand that not everyone has the same freedom to take risks. And so these are challenging questions to try and figure out it, but you have to be realistic about what your particular situation is.
Yeah, yeah. And going back to your children, what are you and your wife trying to teach your children about exploration and these ideas? Like, what do you hope that down the road, maybe 10 years down the road when they're in their 20s and 30 or 20s and 30s and beyond, like, what do you hope they like glean from the experiences you started having in the pandemic with where we started? I'm curious as a parent.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's, as you know, it's tricky trying to figure out what, what you can cram into your kids' heads and what's gonna backfire. One of the things
Yeah.
I think about a lot is that, like, I didn't grow up doing outdoor stuff. I didn't grow up, like, we might have car camped a few times, but I discovered that when I was maybe 15, starting with some friends from high school. We decided to go on a canoe trip, and we didn't know anything about it. Objectively, you could say it was a complete fiasco, but because we knew so little and we struggled so hard. But I loved it, and it sort of sparked a lifelong thing. I look at this and I'm like, man, what I've got, like, this has been a thing in my life since then, from my whole life. Like, every year I go on some pretty, what feel to me like epic trips that really challenge me myself. It's like, oh, I want my kids to have something like that in their lives, because I've gotten so much out of it. And then I remind myself, it's like, my parents didn't like that, insert that into my head. Part of the magic of that is that it's what I discovered myself. And I think that's part of what made it feel special to me, is that I felt like I was discovering a world of my own. And so, like, on some levels, I like, we've taken our kids on some pretty cool, like, pretty hard backpacking and canoeing trips. And I think, am I like robbing them of the opportunity to discover this for themselves? And maybe I am, maybe I'm not, but I guess what I'm thinking in response to your question is, like, I hope in 20 years they're doing something that I couldn't possibly have foreseen, that they will have explored and discovered something, a passion that is uniquely theirs, that I didn't, like, implant. It's like, I'm having my kids take piano lessons because I love music and I loved playing and performing music. We're going on trips. So I'm certainly trying to fill their heads with the stuff I love, but I'm also hoping that the indirect message they're taking is, figure out what you love and follow it. But I could ramble on indefinitely about what do we get about from taking them on these, on going exploring in the outdoors, going on trips. And it's always a tricky balance between, like, you don't want to push kids too hard. They didn't choose it, but you want them. I feel like they have had a little bit of an epiphany of, like, sometimes it's hard and we keep going and it'll have been worthwhile. The idea that just because you feel like you're done, it doesn't mean you have to stop. You can keep pushing. And so that's a delicate thing to teach a 9-year-old. And I certainly am not trying to hammer it home too hard, but I know that they've done some pretty hard hikes. And I think you see that elsewhere in their lives, that they're not scared of, like, it's hard now. Yeah, we can keep going. It's like, just because I'm tired doesn't mean I have to stop. And that's a pretty cool, I think it's a pretty useful lesson in life.
Yeah, for sure. That inner confidence that they can do hard things.
Yeah. Now it's either they're going to be unstoppable or they're going to be telling their therapist about this. And you would not believe what my parents made us do when we were 7 and 9. So here's hoping for the former.
What type of voice, like, do you and your wife, like, ask them questions in terms of the planning or as you're going along? And, like, what type of voice do they have in this process of these experiences? Or, like, and how have you thought about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, a couple things. One is, if we didn't do anything that involved the kids, like, saying, no, I don't want to do this, complaining, or even, putting their foot down, we wouldn't even make it to, like, the end of the street. Like, we wouldn't even, you could say, kids, let's walk to the ice cream store that's 2 blocks away. And, half a block in, they're like, oh my God, I'm so tired. I can't go. So like, you have to, as a parent, you have to be willing sometimes to just say, yeah, button up and let's just keep walking.
Yeah.
You'll be happy when we get to the ice cream store 2 blocks away. And it's the same dynamic multiplied by, 1,000 when you're talking about going on a backcountry hikes. For a week, which we were this summer on very challenging terrain. It's like, the key thing is, 4 days into that hike, there is no, like, even if we wanted to say, okay, you're right, this is too hard, you can go home, that's tough. Like, the only way to get out is to keep going. And so we definitely try to have these conversations with the kids, and we try to have them, like, far removed from any immediate experience. So it's like, okay, here it is. It's October. Hey kids, remember we did a hike last summer? we're contemplating next summer, what kind of thing do you want to do? And, answer one of them, let's go to Disney World. Okay, scratch that off the list. Within the context of things that we're willing to consider. And what we have found is both kids end up being like enthusiastic about it. Let's do something, and we'll have some ideas about where we might go. And it's like, here's where we could go, and here's why we think this would actually be pretty cool. But here's what it would involve. And so, look, like when they were 3 and 5, whatever, we're just taking them on the trip, and like we're hopefully making our best judgment about what's reasonable for them. Now at this point, 9 and 11, they're human beings, and we're trying to assess on an ongoing basis, and not just taking one, not just having the conversation once, but before we make the decision, we're having multiple conversations that this could be hard. We don't have to do this. Here's this other option we could do, but then we wouldn't get to make it to this peak or go along this place. And so, we've got buy-in, and that doesn't mean we don't then have struggles. And the trip we did this year, which was a place called the North Coast Trail on Vancouver Island, which is right at the very top of Vancouver Island. It took us a week to hike, and it's very, very challenging terrain, and it's totally remote. So there's no like halfway exit or anything. It was really hard. And I would say we got to the end of that one, and our thought was maybe we've kind of maxed out about how hard we're going to push, and we need to, whatever we do next summer is, because it's been a steady, as they get older, we've been kind of ramping up each summer. And it's like, what, this was so hard. I don't know that we need to turn the dial up any farther. Let's look for things to do that are beautiful and exciting and engaging and intriguing, but not necessarily harder. Anyway, sorry, that's a long answer, but just to say we're trying to have conversations with them. But the problem is, even if they're on board, then you get out there and it's like, I don't want to do this anymore. So what we I think they're getting old enough to understand now is that, okay, we're going to have the conversation, but once the decision's made, once we head out on this trip, we've pressed play, and there's no pause button. Like, we can't, like, this hike we did was, you take a boat along the ocean to get to the start of the hike, and then you hike to the nearest road a week away. There is no extraction other than like getting in the military or whatever. So, the Coast Guard. So, and it's kind of like, what is it? Odysseus lashing himself to the mast. It's like, we all kind of want to go home on day 3 or day 4. It's hard. Then it's no longer daddy being mean that we have to keep going. It's just like, this is what we discussed. It's like, to get out, we got to keep hiking. So yeah, anyway, as I say all this, I'm like, oh man, I hope Children's Aid is not listening to this, because it sounds like I'm a real jerk, but yeah.
No worry. Don't worry about it, Alex.
But I guess what I would say is what we've done with the kids has been challenging. We've always tried to be very careful that the stage has been set by what we did the previous year, and we've tried to get the kids on board, but it's something we think very carefully about, and we're constantly kind of evaluating and reevaluating what's reasonable. Because look, the surest way to make them hate exploring and hate the outdoors is to force them, put them through a bunch of death marches. And I think we've found a good balance so far, but it's not always obvious.
Yeah, exactly. If we can double click on the difficulty or the hard of that experience, what elements, when you say it was so hard, like, what are you speaking to or about?
Yeah. So, I mean,
hard?
For a trip like this year, which was hiking along an ocean coast, where sometimes along beaches, sometimes you get to reach a headland and you have to go up into the woods, where it's basically temperate rainforest, super dense, so super steep, super muddy, big rocks, lots of trees and roots and stuff. So just physically being, we were, to put it in context, the first day, for example, was 5 miles long, 8 kilometers of hiking. So to me, it's like, dude, we'll do a walk that long just to go down to the cheese store that's in our neighborhood. So it didn't sound hard, but the terrain was so hard that it took us more than 8 hours to cover those 5 miles. And we were pushing pretty hard, because you're getting to these big inclines where there's a rope, and you're basically rappelling up muddy clay with a very heavy pack. Obviously we're not putting heavy packs on the kids, but they were carrying backpacks, and you're hauling yourself up, and then you're walking along, miles of beach where it's shifting big stones. So you can't, like, it's very tiring on the legs. So a lot of what I'm talking about here is the physical challenge of getting over extremely, extremely challenging terrain. Now, that's kind of evolved where, because alongside that, a few years ago, we might have been doing hikes where the terrain was very easy. Terrain was, it was just, we're walking along a path. But if you're a kid, if you're a 6-year-old, it's still like, what, you wanted me to keep going for another 4 hours? Like, come on. So there's an element of hardness that's independent of the physical. That's just like, we have to keep moving in this challenging terrain. And when we get there, we're not going to have a couch or anything. We're going to, boil a little dehydrated meal and then sleep in a tent. And then we're now getting to the point where we're adding on like very challenging hiking conditions. And it's like, I find it challenging hiking over jumbled driftwood logs. The kids' legs are half the size of mine, so they're having to crawl over these logs and stuff. So there's the physical, but I actually think the more fundamental challenge for kids is the sort of the unknown. Like, again, this goes back to exploring an uncertainty. It's like, my wife and I have planned this trip and we have the map and we know how far we're going. We know what's involved. To the kids, it's this, we try to loop the kids in, but they're not that great at reading maps or understanding. So it's like, to them, it's just like, keep walking, keep going. And how much longer? A long way. And we'll tell them some numbers. We'll tell them how far it is or but those numbers don't compute to them. To them, it's just like this, it feels like an endless challenge. And there's something really, the way we perceive challenges really depends in our ability to understand when they're going to end. And so I think for kids, these long challenges feel endless. They can't conceptualize when they're a third of the way or halfway or 2/3 of the way through the challenge. And I think that's what makes it hard. It's also probably more than, it's like, when I say they come back with having gained something, it's not that they've gained the ability, quad muscle strength to climb up really steep slopes. It's that they've gained some confidence in their ability to keep going even when the challenge seems endless.
Yeah. And what have you gained, you and your wife gained as parents at the end of these challenges that you've learned as in terms of growth as a parent? I'm curious about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, one thing we gain is we love being out in the wilderness like that. And so I think the reason we started these sorts of trips was not like, let's shove some character into our kids. It was like, we love these places. We love being in the outdoors. It would be really sad to say we're not going to do it for the next 15 years till our kids are independent. So we get that. But I think even more, probably the most valuable thing all of us get out of this trip is we are together with no distractions for a week. We all sleep in one tent and all day we're together. And the kids have our undivided attention for, except when I'm so tired that I can't focus on them. but this is, I hate to say it, but it's a rare thing. Like, obviously we're like everybody, we try to give our kids as much attention as possible, but we've got lots of work to do. We've got meals to cook. We've got laundry to do. We've got devices that keep pinging and demanding our attention right when our kids are telling us something important and so on. So I think we get time with the kids. There is no other week in the year that we would finish with such a real sense of who our kids are right now, what their thoughts are, what their hopes and dreams are, where they're at, because we are entirely together with them for that week.
That sounds like an ultimate connection.
For better or worse. Yeah. There are certainly moments of frustration too, but yeah, I mean, and this is, you asked earlier about exploring alone versus exploring together. And there's this sort of sense, and again, I connect it to like my running experiences. It's like the people who I've been running with for years or who I, was on college cross country teams with or whatever. It's like, I don't want to trivialize war, but it's like, you feel like you've been through a war together. You've been through things together. And so you're bonded. You have experiences that bring you together. And so with our kids and with each other, we go through these hikes and it's like, we've been through something together. I mean, obviously we're family, so we're bonded, but it's like, this is much more of an intense bonding experience than playing Jenga after dinner or something. And God knows we have trouble finding time to play Jenga after dinner with the sort of chaos of everyday life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, that makes so much sense because you were talking earlier about like the physical, the quad muscles or something, but to me it's really about the mental, emotional, the ups and downs of the experience. I'm personally so deeply bonded to my college tennis teammates because of the roller coaster of emotions of competing against other schools and with each other and trying to improve and make these incremental improvements. And that emotional aspect is what it was about, not the 2-hour practices of physically going to the weight room or
Yeah, and the adversity is part of that, right? Like I think that, linking it to the idea of exploring where failure is a part of it, or where challenges, not just failure, but days when it takes longer to get to the campsite than you expect. If it was, I feel like, I don't know if there aren't many experiences in life that are just all positive, but it's like if there's a group of people who all win a lottery together, I don't think that's necessarily going to be as bonding. It's like, hey, this is great. We all got a bunch of money. See you later. But if you've been through the highs and lows and the periods in between where you're trying to figure out, is this going to go our way or is it not? There is something about that experience that I think you see each other in your best and worst moments, and you help each other cope. And, so I think in a sort of micro way, we get that with each other and with our kids when we go backpacking and do things like that. Or even when I go down to the park, down to the river with my kids, and we build little rafts to float down the river or something like that. Those are little micro adventures where I'm 100% with them, and where we're forming some of those bonds, I think.
Yeah, sounds like it gives your life meaning.
Yeah, meaning is a big word, but one of the areas that I of research that I found really interesting that I came across while researching this book is about something called the effort paradox, which is trying to understand, essentially, it's psychologists trying to understand why we do hard things. Why do we run marathons? Why do we climb mountains? And they come up with all these examples of things that we do not in spite of the fact they're hard, but because they're hard. We don't climb a mountain, just to get to the top. Otherwise, you just take the gondola. You climb because you want to actually go through the experience of getting to the top. And there's a lot of sort of speculation or attempts to understand, why are we wired this way? Why do we want to do things that are hard? And the most compelling explanation that I've seen is that if you ask people about things they do in their lives and what's most meaningful to them, there's a really tight link between things that are challenging and things that people find meaningful. They may not be able to define the meaning of life, but the things that say that they feel give their life a sense of purpose tend to be hard things. We find doing challenging things meaningful, whether it's raising kids or whether it's running a marathon or something like that, which may seem arbitrary, but nonetheless, people find meaningful.
Very much so. Alex, I could talk to you all week. I find this fascinating, and I absolutely love your writing, love your work. The stories in here are just incredible in your book. So, in closing, where can people follow you and your work, find your book, and any closing thoughts that you wanna finish with as we're up on time?
Sure. Well, yeah. First of all, thanks for a great conversation, Chad. I really, really appreciate this. Probably the easiest place to find me is my website, which is alexhutchinson.net. You can sign up. I have a newsletter that's just kind of updates of what I've been writing, and there's various social media links and stuff. Yeah, and I write once a week roughly for Outside Magazine on their website, but there's links to that too at alexhutchinson.net. In terms of closing thoughts, I don't have any deep words of wisdom other than that exploring in this broad sense that we're using the word, in other words, not just trying to make it to the North Pole. It's challenging, and it's usually not the easy option. Very rarely, I think, do people regret having taken a chance. Sometimes things go wrong. Like, I'm sure the explorers who died, they're probably like, yeah, actually, we should have just hung out on the sofa. But especially when we're talking in this broader sense, it's like this really is what taking the opportunity to embrace challenges is one of the key things that helps life feel meaningful. And that, I can't think of a better goal to pursue.
I agree. I love that. Well, thank you, Alex.
Okay. Thank you, Chad.
Thank you for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you liked it, please share with a friend on social media. That goes a long way to promoting this podcast so I can continue to interview and share these conversations with fascinating people. You can follow me on social media, Chad Stoloff, and visit my website, chadstoloff.wordpress.com, for more information. I'd love it if you would leave a review to support the podcast. Thanks so much. Until next time.